Imagine you all live on the first floor of a building, and there is a window on the first floor, and there is a window on the first floor, and your view of the world is all through that window, and your view of the world is all through that window. You don't even know that the stories above you. You don't even know that there are stories above you, floors higher up that you may reside in, Each floor has its own property. Each floor has its own property and a very different view, and a very different view when things move to the higher floors. When things move to the higher floors, they must be altered. They must be altered to be able to be held there, to be able to be held there. This is vibrational accord. This is vibrational accord. A-C-C-O-R-D, A-C-C-O-R-D, or A-C-H-O-R-D, or A-C-H-O-R-D as on a piano. The reality you know yourselves through, the reality that you know yourselves through, some in high ways, some in high ways, some in low ways, some in low ways, is still operating in a false belief, that you are separate from, that you are separate from source. Now, the real challenge with this is that the very idea of source has been so contaminated, must want anything to do with it, that most of you don't want anything to do with it, and often for very good reasons, and often for very good reason. You have vengeful gods. Gods will save some and others. Gods that will save some and not others. Gods will allow people to burn in hell. Gods that will allow people to burn in hell. You have gods that will burn the witch. You have gods that will burn the witch and let the poor starve and let the poor starve. Do you understand this? Do you understand this? The gods that you have created, the gods that you have created are all tainted by the common field, or your idea of the common field, or your idea of the common field that has created a God that has created a God that will serve itself in separation, The idea of a God in a cloud. The idea of a God in a cloud, and you stuck in the mud, is what you have invented, what you've chosen to learn through, and what you have chosen to learn through, and in most ways contributed to generationally through thousands of years of misunderstanding. The one-note song. You may call it God, you may call it the Word, you may call it divine essence, you may call it nothing at all, it will still be there, but to begin to move to that level of tone, where you may abide in an experiential way, in this tone, and know yourself as of it, It's not only radical departure, it changes everything, absolutely everything that you thought was so, Now, this need not be frightening. In fact, it's quite amazing. The chair is still a chair. You know you're sitting in a chair, not a rock. You know you're sitting in a chair, not a rock, but you understand chair. In a very different way, Just understand body, just as you understand body, or relationship to others, or your relationship to others in very different ways, because once you are not supporting the false decree of separation, I am separate from my source, I am separate from the ones around me, I am separate from the ones around me. You have a different experience of being. When the lens of separation is taken off the camera, what you see is altered. Now, here is the great challenge. This does not happen at the level of tone. This does not happen at the level of tone that you know of as a common tone, that you know of as the common field in vibration. The common field in vibration is so tainted by fear that everything you see, is actually informed by it, Imagine there's painting on a wall. Imagine there is a painting on a wall, a violin painting. You walk around the room with a violin painting. You walk around the room with a violin painting. It informs everything in the room. You try not to look at it. Who wants to see that? But it's always there. Informing your lives. The action of fear. Is to claim more fear, and every choice made in fear. Will always get you more of the same. The divine self or true self. The divine self or true self. The aspect of the divine that's come as you. The aspect of the divine that's come as you, that seeks re-articulation through, that seeks re-articulation through you, or the manifestation of itself, or the manifestation of itself through you, and then your world through you, and then your world is invoked in the lower field, but aligned to in what we call the upper room, but aligned to in what we call the upper room. What the upper room is, is the octave of vibration, is the octave of vibration above and beyond the common field, above and beyond the common field. Now, we have said this many times again. Now, we have said this many times. We will say it again. You can sing any song. You can sing any song in any octave, into infinity, into infinity, and beyond what your voice can carry, beyond what your voice can carry. That song still exists. That song still exists in the higher octaves, What we do with our students, is transpose them vibrationally, so they may be sung, that they may be sung or expressed, which is what sung means, what we call the upper room, and what we call the upper room, or the higher octave expression, or the higher octave of expression. We have said this prior, we'll say it again. We have said this prior, we will say this again. The upper room is the highest human being. The upper room is the highest a human being can hold vibrationally, while maintaining form, There are octaves beyond this. Infinitely actually, some of which you will encounter, some which you may never have to, but the realization of the divine through you, which occurs in the upper room, actually reclaims the world you see, out of the old inherited or hereditary logic that you seek to impose upon it, What does that mean? He says, what does that mean? He says, well, you've been so indoctrinated what things should be. Well, you've been so indoctrinated into what things should be that you count on them to be what they were, and consequently the world you see, is always resembling the world of yesterday, the world of yesterday. The moral encoding, high and low, and in between high and low, and in between is always transferred, or imposed upon what you see, or imposed upon what you see, a good thing or a bad thing, a high thing or a low thing, without your even meaning to do so. To understand yourselves now, in this very moment, is understanding the idea of self, is to understand that the idea of self, the idea of Paul, or Jason, or Ellen, or Evan, whoever sits before us, or whoever sits before us, is simply an idea that is attending this class, would be a nice start, The idea of Paul is here and speaking. The idea of Paul is here and speaking. Your idea of Paul sitting here speaking. Your idea of Paul sitting here speaking is also occurring through the lens you hold, when you move to what we call the upper room. When you move to what we call the upper room, the lens is actually released. The lens is actually released in the stages that you can release it, To release it too rapidly. To release it too rapidly requires a kind of dissociation, from the personality structure, we do not work with, The personality has its place. That is the idea of you. But the idea of you itself can be transposed or reclaimed in the upper room, known anew, and become party to the high octave, through the divine self, that will be operating through, you. Now, what does operating through you mean? Well, very simply put, the idea of self, that has been moored in the lower field, becomes unmoored and indeed lifted, to a level of tone where it can express without the old bias, indoctrination through fear, all the shoulds of hereditary, are all the shoulds of hereditary meaning that you have acquired, and seek to impose on things you see. A world made new is just that. A world made new is just that. This is the world that is claimed from the upper room. This is the world that is claimed from the upper room by the one who knows who she is, by the one who knows who she is, what he is, and how she serves, and what those claims mean. And what those claims mean, because they are spoken from the true self, invoked at the level of true self, is the true self who knows, and expresses, reclaims itself in all manifestation.